Okay, welcome everyone. This was kind of a slightly late organized session, but I think it's going to be a good one. So I have with me, we're going to be talking about sorghum beer, which I think is, for a lot of people outside of Africa, probably a mystery. Probably never brewed with it, probably don't know much about it at all, but it's actually the main grain in Africa for beer, and has been for forever, I suppose. So what's happened is that Jessi here from Kweza, and along with Yakima Chief Hops, and we have Luke Kulchstein. I'm not pronouncing your name probably right there. Kulchstein, is it? Kulchstein. So Kweza and Yakima have come together to come up with this project to try and encourage more people to try out brewing with sorghum, and also in a way to support Kweza, which is the first Rwandan craft brewery, and it's completely owned by women, and it's actually more than a brewery, I think Jessi would probably say. So we want to kind of go through all that. So I have with me, as I said, I have Jessi, who was one of the founders of Kweza. I have Luke from Yakima Chief Hops. I have Tapiwa who's the brewer with Kweza. And we have Steve Beauchesne, who is, well, where to start with you? You're
Who the heck are you?
You're in Canada, but you're also on the board of Kweza. So it brings in a whole lot of experience here that is amazing. So what we're going to do is we're going to probably just start with the idea behind this project is to encourage people to brew with sorghum, to give it a try, see what happens. But a lot of people have, it's a completely new grain. They don't know what to do. They don't know the techniques, the recipes, and they don't know what works together. So that's where Kweza and Yakima came together to develop a hop mix. Would that be fair enough? That would work well with sorghum. So we'll probably talk about Kweza a little bit and how this is going to help Kweza. But maybe, Jessi, it would be good to start off with just, what is sorghum and what's its place in African brewing, and kind of go from there, maybe. So do you want to take it? Do you want to lead to that?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having us all for a sorghum-based podcast. It's quite exciting to be talking about it. Sorghum is I had never heard about it. I mean, I'm from America, right? And I had never heard of sorghum before I moved to Africa. But then come to find out, the U.S. is actually the #1 producer of sorghum in the world. And so it's a crop that is used a lot for making sugars, for animal feed, etc. But it's also an incredibly amazing crop. It's native to Africa. So here it's a biodiversity crop. It's natively from here. It's gluten-free and has been used through history in African brewing. So obviously I'm not African. And so I'm learning from those here and working with traditional knowledge that's in Rwanda and in Africa. And so it's traditionally been used, like the crest of actually the Rwandan government has sorghum in it. It's such an important crop to the country. And it's used both like in porridge and for nutrition, as well as traditionally in brews. So there's, going back into Rwandan history, there's the king's beer, the queen's beer, and it's all made with sorghum. And so this is throughout Africa. And I think Tapiwa can probably speak more to this later about, there's all different brews throughout Africa that are traditionally made. It's normally an opaque beer and goes by different names throughout Africa. What we're doing is taking the traditional grain and the process of malting it, but then bringing it into more of a modern process of brewing that ends up with more a clear beer. A lot of people drink Kweza beer. We have IPAs, we have stouts, we have kind of your European taste palette, and a lot of people taste it and have no clue that it's made with sorghum. So, we're combining tradition and modern palate into something that's available on the market. So yeah, sorghum itself it looks kind of like corn when it's starting to grow in the field, like to those in familiar with cornfields and such, it's got this tall stalk with the leaves, but then it has this head of grains it's many small grains, like this very small pea-sized red or white grains, and those are a starch, and it's gluten-free. And so that's what's harvested, dried, and then malted, just like barley would be malted, in order for us to use that. And it's climate resilient. It grows in very marginal land. It doesn't require all the inputs and stuff that other kind of, pesticide or fertilizer heavy crops do. So it's really a great crop kind of in the world in general. And also goes back to the origins of brewing that, beer started in Mesopotamia and Egypt with African and Middle Eastern grains, and so that's what we're trying to kind of tell some of that story, and also make it accessible.
Right. Yeah. Just from where it stands in terms of, like you said, it's like America produces more of it than anybody else, and it's also very, very versatile and can grow anywhere. So does that make it? Like where do people get the sorghum? What's it used for mainly outside of Africa? So if it's the main grain in Africa, but there's huge amounts of it grown in America, what do Americans use it for?
Mainly for cattle feed, and it's also used in extracts to, like, there's a lot of sugar, just like there is in barley or corn or other cereals. So you can extract the sugars from it for other industrial processes.
Okay.
But it's interesting, you can't find it in the grocery store.
Right.
Yeah, and does it taste anything like barley or wheat or anything like that? If you're just, like I said, if you were to find it there and make a porridge out of it or something, and just trying to figure out where its palate is.
Yeah, it's a kind of like, I'd probably classify it with like a thick couscous almost, or like I'm trying to think of something that it's similar to. It kind of has like a chewy texture if you're just eating it plain, like you just boil it and kind of put it on the side of something, or it's put in porridge, like it's more like an oatmeal when you do it that way. And so, yeah, so it's rather ironic that the US is the #1 producer in the world, but you don't see it, you don't hear about it. It's number 5 cereal in the world in terms of production and consumption around the world. So we're talking a major global crop, that's nutrient dense, climate resilient, like I said, and even with things like climate change happening and barley bans moving and things like that, sorghum is another potential crop that people can be using to be brewing with. And like I said, it's gluten-free. So a lot of people are really, going the gluten-free route. Most of our beers have 10-20% grains still that are barley. We're trying to convert over. It just has more to do with the roasting process and for different flavors and colors right now before we have that process here. And a lot of people come to me after they've had a few Kwezas and they're like, what's different? Something feels different. And I think it's the lack of gluten, like you don't have that kind of like bloaty feeling the day after. And so you notice it kind of, it also has a lighter palate, which is some of what I think Luke can talk about later with how we've worked on the lack of mouthfeel and things. Like sorghum's much lighter on the palate. And so therefore has impacts on recipes and oils and such. So, but yeah, it's around. It's a very common grain, and so we're here to help you brew with it, and be able to encourage the use of it more.
Okay, so yeah, so then, I mean, it's obviously, like you said, it's been brewed. People have been using it to brew for millennia, but outside of Africa, it's not that common. So where do you see? I mean, where do you see non-African brewers going with it? Like, what challenges did you have as Kweza coming in if you already were familiar with it? Are they going to be different challenges? Or are they going to be... How is that going to work?
Well, I'm not, Steve, do you want to talk about the origins kind of Kweza? And because I picked up from you on really the sorghum recipe.
Yeah, well, I will mention that there are a few gluten-free breweries out there that have been using sorghum for quite a few years. I would say Glutenberg is a Canadian brewery that is typically wins all the awards for every gluten-free beer, and I'll give them a free plug here. They make very, very good beer using not just sorghum, but they do use a bit of sorghum in their brewing. When we first started the Kweza project, it was sort of a charitable give back to raise money to start the brewery. But we did do a trip down to Rwanda to do traditional sorghum brewing. And the challenge for a lot of modern brewers right now is breaking down the starches into sugars for use. And so if you're using sorghum in traditional kind of brew mash tun and things like that, if you use 30% or less, it's actually fairly straightforward because the enzymes present in the barley will be present enough to break down the starches in the sorghum. But if you go over that 30%, you have to start getting into some special techniques or the addition of enzymes, that kind of thing. So that's one of the challenges that's maybe kept brewers a little bit hesitant to work with sorghum. And then I think there's just sort of a general level of ignorance. It's not something that, when you go to the homebrew supply shop, you can't find the sorghum next to the barley on the shelf kind of thing. So it's one of these things where, while there's a wealth of knowledge in the African countries on using this, that knowledge has just not transferred over to the rest of the planet. And that's, I think, the main reason why it's not used.
Yeah, I remember when we were talking to Jessi before, we had this, talking about African brewing, and there was an American session, and I sticks in my mind that one of the brewers there, I think he was originally from Ghana, but he was saying that when he started brewing, he wanted to use sorghum, and he just kept being told, you cannot brew with sorghum. With sorghum. And no, you cannot brew with sorghum. And no one would accept it.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that's talking about. And he said, but I go home and everybody's brewing with sorghum. It's strange. So you think some of that is just because it never became a major crop in outside of Africa, and it's just lack of knowledge mainly.
Yeah, I would say so. And in particular, it's just the way that the starches break down, because in barley grain, the enzymes to break down the starches are present in the grain. They're not necessarily present in the sorghum. So it's, if you were to just put a bunch into the mash tun and hope for great results, you'd be pretty disappointed. And I think sort of while there was thousands of people brewing with it for thousands of years in one continent, no one bothered to take the time really to figure it out. But I say nobody. I think that's unfair. I know there's a lot of global breweries that have operations in Africa who have been using sorghum for decades and decades. So it's not like this completely unknown secret. It's just not hit sort of craft beer, I would say, in particular, because not many craft brewers have really done a lot of brewing in Africa. But you look at kind of the history of brewing, and people use either what's readily available, or they use what's taxed less. And the history of brewing is a history of taxation and what was locally available. It's right. The only two things that have changed brewing history, really.
Okay. So I mean, what would you say to someone who wants to start? Let's get into this. If you want to start brewing with sorghum, you want to start experimenting with it, what do you need? What kind of scale do you need? Do you need to be big, small? Do you need to have a separate setup to deal with this, with the enzyme issue, or can you just do it on what is now the standard brewing kit and just make some minor changes?
Jessi, you've got the most experience with this now. Do you want to, or I guess Tapiwa, you maybe you do.
Yeah, I guess, Tapiwa, do you want to talk about our current process and like the scale that we're brewing at now and the process you use for brewing? Oh, I think you're on mute, Tapiwa. Oh, there might be technical difficulties on her side. I'll jump in, and Tapiwa, if you figure it out, or the internet just might be slow there. So we currently brew we're doing 40-liter batches at a time. So we have a Braumeister, like we're still in the R&D phase, and our equipment that's 1,000-liter brew house is en route. So what we've done is, so we actually use malted sorghum here. It's traditionally malted. The grains are soaked for 3 days, and then they're soaked with an ash, with banana leaf ash. And we're in the middle of kind of testing how much that changes the pH, and then therefore the enzyme activity and all different things, like what is critical. And because when you speak to the traditional malters, they just say, because my grandmother did this, that's why I do it. There's not the kind of like, because it changes this or does this. It's just like, you can't not do it. They're like, it won't, your beer will be horrible if you don't add this banana leaf ash. And so it's just like a known, you must do this. So we're in the process of looking into like the particularly Rwandan malt process, because I've talked to people in South Africa who brewed with malted sorghum, but they don't use ash, it turns out, and they've not had luck with being able to use that, and like Steve said, they end up having to use enzymes or put in a lot of barley in order to do that. But our beers are 80 to 100% sorghum, and we get conversion, and it's naturally lower alcohol. Like we end up, most of our beers are about 4 to 4.2% alcohol. But they do seem to work. And the biggest issue we have is that sorghum is naturally smaller and doesn't have the husk like barley does. So the biggest issue is in lautering. And so we mix in rice hulls, just empty rice hulls that we get from agricultural kind of waste processes. And that acts as our husks in order to be able to do the lautering. So we have our current process, that's how we brew the beer, and we're about to start in on another system. And we did have to have it custom made and to have stronger paddles, like stronger rakes and things to be able to handle 80 to 100% sorghum, just because of the thickness of it. And we also have different backflows and such in case the lauter gets stuck. But it is, like we've just started out where, if you're a home brewer, then it's really no problem. You can kind of mix it and mash it. And the larger breweries, it's more about finding different ways to mix in, whether it's rice hulls or other things, or using enzymes. If you're using straight sorghum that's not malted, or you're using malted sorghum but that's not done the traditional way, that's where I think maybe Steve, you can jump in more with that knowledge. Or extracts, so I know that there's a lot of sorghum extract you can get from like rice suppliers and people in the States. There's also different malt houses. So I know CNC Malt I think they're in North Carolina or Philadelphia or Pennsylvania. They malted sorghum actually for some breweries to do a collab with us last year. And they had success with being able to use that in making a regular just ale. So there are processes, that it is quite possible to kind of use it as the main ingredient. So yeah, Steve, I don't know if you want to jump back in on different, like when enzymes or equipment or anything else is needed outside of what we know, which is our malted sorghum.
Yeah, I guess the sort of the big question here is, are you starting a brewery from scratch and you want to work exclusively with sorghum, in which case you can, maybe get a mash press instead of a mash tun, that kind of thing. If you're working with your existing system and what you want to do is make a beer, then probably the easiest way is to use either a little bit of enzyme or blend it with some barley malt. I would say, especially if you're kind of dipping your toe into this, easiest way to do it would be keep it under 30% to just play around with it. If you're liking the way that works, then as you scale up, just work with your local lab to get the right enzyme mix in there. And then on the lautering side, the grains are incredibly small. So whether you're using cotton or rice hulls or something like that, putting something in there so that you don't clog up your mash tun, because no one likes a clogged mash tun.
So since this is this project, which we'll get onto the actual mechanics of this project, of this challenge, whatever you want to call it, in a while with Luke here, but it's aimed mainly, at existing brewers, existing commercial breweries. So they're going to have some setup that's there. So they might have a pilot setup and a main setup, or maybe they'll just have one kind of medium-sized setup. So they're going to have to be more careful on some steps here than they would on that they're used to. They're going to have to, from the sound of it, be very careful on not getting clogged, but also just the ratios. This is what you're going to be encouraging to experiment with, I guess, is the ratios as well, is it?
Yeah. So
Go ahead, Luke.
I was going to say there's a lot of people certainly in Europe who have only ever really used sorghum through wanting to achieve a gluten-free brand within their portfolio. Similar to Steve was saying, there's like one or two completely gluten-free breweries. Certainly there's a couple in the UK, a couple in continental Europe that will be set up specifically to do this. But we know that obviously some of the brewers that took part in the original Kweza project and some of the others we've been talking to have been looking at extract as a possibility there as well. It's certainly across Europe where malted sorghum itself is quite difficult to get hold of, with the exception of a few key markets. Actually, the UK is one of them that's relatively easy to get hold of. But sorghum extract is a much easier option for a lot of people, I would say. Certainly for a lot of the customers that we've been talking to around the wider kind of the project that we've been working with Kweza on.
Okay, so you can't let that go. Why is the UK easier to get malted sorghum than the rest of Europe?
I have absolutely no idea, to be honest. It's just one of those things where there are a couple of maltsters that just seem to have the ability to do it. There's obviously a very long history of heritage grain brewing in the UK. You've got people like Chris Malt who are actually reintroducing a lot of heritage grains, heritage barleys specifically back into their portfolio and things now. So I think the use of things like sorghum or millet or spelt never really left the UK industry. It's just always been a tiny proportion thereof. So for one way, shape or form, it just kind of is available. Certainly, I think because of the rise in gluten-free brewing in the last 10-15 years as well, I think has definitely helped the availability there.
Yeah, it just raises a question for me, actually. So gluten-free bread, do they use sorghum in a lot of that, or does anybody know? Just occurred to me.
I'm not sure. I think
I was just wondering whether everybody mentions it for the beer. Maybe it's also in the bread, but no bakers here, so.
I would imagine probably millet flour would be a portion of it.
Mm.
All right. So then this project, let's get back to the specifics of the project. So what you want to do, obviously, is Kweza, as Yakima as well, is you're trying to encourage people to brew with sorghum, or at least, like I said, to try it out. So you've worked with a number of different brewers, both of you, to try and understand what those challenges are and where people are going to find difficulties, and you've prepared recipes and all that. So one of the things Yakima's done is you've done an awful lot of work on identifying which hops work best with it to make that part at least easier for people. They can go and pick up some specific hops and not have to worry about that section of it. So how did you go about that, or what did you find out then, or how did it work?
the jump off point for that was we spent a lot of time talking to Jessi and the Kweza team about the flavor profile and the texture profile of sorghum in finished beer, and trying to make sure that we can find something that will bridge the gap very comfortably between the traditional kind of palate and flavor of sorghum brewing and Western kind of Euro-American flavor palettes and what we expect in modern craft beers, certainly in European style craft beers. So we looked at two major things. There was an ever so slight tartness present in quite a lot of sorghum beers. And Jessi mentioned this earlier. Because sorghum reacts differently to barley, it doesn't have the gluten strains. It gives a thinner kind of textural experience to a beer. And certainly with the last 10 years or so of American-led European-style brewing, texture is hugely important, especially in a lot of modern hop-forward beers. And then you go back into traditional European brewing, into Belgian brewing, German brewing, English brewing as well. The texture of the beer is almost as important as the flavor. So we spent quite a bit of time going through like our hop science over the last few years to try and find something that could fill in a couple of those gaps as well, to try and create a hop bundle, as we're calling it, to make that final product feel a bit more natural to someone that maybe isn't used to drinking sorghum beers. And we settled on 3 varieties, which, when used together, give a really quite wide variety of styles that can be brewed with them. They're great kind of agronomical varieties as well, which is a big thing for us, obviously, with the biodiversity angle of sorghum brewing itself. It's something that's incredibly important to us at YCH. So we wanted to try and find some interesting varieties that are incredibly agronomically strong and work really, really well in final brewing. So the 3 varieties we settled on, one is Sabro, which is it's a relatively recent variety into the global brewing scene. It was only kind of released 4 or 5 years ago now. But the thing that Sabro brings to the table is a perceived sweetness. It's from a Neo-Mexicanus genome, which is from wild hops, effectively. So it's a domesticated cultivar of wild hops, and it has an incredible, almost creamy texture that it brings into the beer. It's a very strange. It's a strange thing to try and explain, unless people are very familiar with Sabro. I absolutely love it. Can be a little bit of a divisive hop for some people. I think it's absolutely fantastic. But it has this incredible perceived sweetness to it. We've also gone with Idaho 7, which is a hop that's been only kind of readily available globally for 2 or 3 years, developed by a guy called Nate Jackson and Jackson Hop in Idaho, hence Idaho 7. But it's another one which has absolutely huge oil quantity for the hops as well. So we kind of look at the breakdown in oil quantities and the makeup of that oil quantity as well. So Idaho 7 is hugely packed with myrcene as the primary bulk of the hop oil constitute of Idaho 7, which gives a lot of really nice tropical, almost like lemongrassy mango kind of high tones in there as well, along with a lovely kind of almost leafy earthiness in there as well. So it's something that kind of fills in a lot of the gaps that people would kind of expect to see in there. And the last one we went for was Equinox, which it's been around for quite a while. But what we've specifically gone for with Equinox is the cryo hops version of Equinox. So cryo hops is a process that YCH came up with about 4 or 5 years ago now, which is a process that takes the hops, effectively drops them down to sub-zero temperatures in a nitrogen environment, slowly crushes the hops to remove the leaf matter, and leaves us with just a pure resin pellet at the end of it. Equinox in its cone form has a really kind of bright phenolic, not phenolic, sorry, like a polyphenolic greenness to it as well, which is absolutely wonderful. But when you take it into its cryo format, it really enhances the tropical fruit flavor of it as well. The thing that I get from Equinox Cryo mostly is dry papaya, and with some of the flavors that Jessi and the team have been brewing with as well, some of the flavor pickups on there very much a tropical fruit led hop variety. Just picks up nicely, and it's another one that has an absolutely huge residual oil quantity in there as well, which just leaves perceived texture to a beer as well. It's been some of these high oil or high residual oil and high perceived residual sweetness hops have been kind of the secret to a lot of the New England IPA brewing over the last like 5 or 6 years. It's how you get that huge textural silky mouthfeel into it. So we wanted to try and take some of what's been very much the cutting edge of hop science and brewing science in the States for the last 10 years or so, and kind of put some of that into the thought process of traditional brewing. And we think we've come up with a really nice kind of harmonious blend of hops that actually benefits from both the flavor profiles and also some of the perceived shortfalls of sorghum in brewing when you're looking at it through the eyes of kind of modern European brewing, at least.
Right. So these are designed to be, like I said, to be able to produce what would be considered a modern beer. This is not an attempt to kind of to get brewers making a traditional beer as such. It's to bring that into a modern palate, is it?
Yeah, we've tried to bridge that gap a little bit, because the jump, some people have been absolutely wild about the idea of, okay, let's brew something incredibly traditional, let's go with as classic a version of this as we can do, and that's absolutely wonderful. But for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people's end consumers, that might be a little bit too much of a jump. So we've tried to come at this project as a mid gap, a kind of an introduction to what sorghum can do. The idea of brewing something that's completely gluten-free to people that have no celiac tendencies, it can potentially be an off-put. The idea of brewing with something that people are not familiar with can potentially be an off-put. So we've tried to come up with something that will allow people to either brew something very traditional if they want to. I know that Jessi and the team actually brewed with some of these hops in a much more traditional way as well. But equally, to try and find something that most brewers around the world could say, okay, I understand this portion of it, and this will help me to kind of implement this portion of it as well. And equally to kind of ease that in with their end consumers as well.
Right. So yeah, so that makes sense. It's yeah, like you said, it's to make it easy for the brewers, but also make it easy for them to sell, I guess, at the end of the day. That there's no point brewing a traditional beer if nobody else will drink it for you.
Yeah, and the hope is that people will enjoy these beers, and they'll further kind of experiment with sorghum brewing and things like that as well. I think if you've had a good experience with something within a sphere that you understand, you're much more likely to go in with 2 feet there afterwards, and that's kind of what we're hoping to achieve through this. Yeah, well, that kind of matches with I think a lot of craft beer drinkers are doing. Like, they start off with the very hoppy ones, and then like saisons and all lambic sours are becoming more popular because the palates just kind of change over time. So these hops then are, when you're expecting people to take part, from what Steve was saying as well, it sounds like you don't expect them to be brewing all sorghum beers. You're expecting them to be maybe using 20% sorghum as a start to kind of get their feet wet on that. Is that right? Yeah, we've done a few recipes, again, like in collaboration with Kweza, with this of here's some suggested ideas. Here's, if you're completely unfamiliar with sorghum as a grain or an extract, or kind of whatever the format that is available in their region, we've come up with some recipes as some guidance. But equally, there's a couple of people on the first round that were just like, no, we'd like to brew something in a very much in the style of how we normally brew. And equally, people that are just like, well, no, we'd love to brew something in the style how Kweza and some of the African brewers brew as well. So it really is open to interpretation, I think. But the idea is to really kind of highlight that there is this incredible grain that a lot of people don't really know about. There's a lot more to brewing out there than barley and wheat. And yeah, it's kind of it isn't just a gluten-free grain. It can be a really interesting flavor, like thing to throw into your flavor palette as well. And yeah, trying to kind of open that visibility piece a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, most brewers like to experiment with something. They like to try something new, and you know that's how they got into brewing in the first place. So being opening up the opportunities for them is that they'll probably jump on you for it and grab it. So, I mean, as part of this project, maybe we'll just go back for a moment. I know Steve's left us there, but back to Kweza. So Kweza is, because this project is going to be also assisting Kweza, so maybe we should have a little talk before we get into the mechanics of the project itself. Kweza is the first craft brewery in Rwanda. Maybe Jessi, you want to just tell us, because I know from anything you've told me in the past, it's more than a brewery. It's almost a movement, if I can get so grand.
Please be grand. I'd love it if that's our legacy. That really is, like, we have two things, right? We have our product and we have our values and background of why we're creating our product. And really a lot of that is making sure that we, like the fact that beer history is, women brewing beer in Mesopotamia and Egypt is not well known. And we want to be able to tell that story. But speaking of which, Tapiwa, do you want to talk more about kind of Kweza, the goals of Kweza, the products, etc.? It's bandwidth allows. She's at the brewery making a beer right now, so okay. That's part of the problem here.
I think your connection isn't good enough at the brewery.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Tapiwa. Keep trying. If I hear you pop up, then I'll just be quiet and you can keep talking. So yeah, it started at so Steve Beauchesne was on here, right? He had started this project with Fina Uwaneza, a Rwandan woman, back in 2016. And she stepped away from the project for various reasons. And then, so that's when I came in to help continue the project along. And the goal being to have a women-run craft brewery in Rwanda, right? And so that's what we're doing. So we are the first licensed craft brewery in Rwanda. It's not to say that brewing doesn't happen here. There's a very strong home brewing culture here. It's called ichigaje here. So we've been talking about like what's the traditional beer, and it's ichigaje. And so it's a very thick, opaque beer. We use the same origin ingredient. It is malted sorghum, but then the traditional version is that it's ground up into a flour and then mixed with warm water and then left to ferment. And there's a long you can go back to the previous podcast we've done with Brian here about that. We talked about the yeast process. That's very traditional here. It's a yeast substrate. And so there's a long process or a long history of that. And then what we're doing is just kind of like there's the desire for these, like, the clear beers, the modern beers, etc. And what we're finding is that Kweza beer has to like me as an American, if I drank it side by side with a barley beer, I wouldn't necessarily know like the difference between the two. But for example, like especially older Rwandan people, like that there's a smell in the beer that they can detect that smells like childhood in a way, right? They detect it right away. And they kind of look at me like, you made it chigaje? Like I'm a clear beer fan now. Like, what are you doing to me? But then they take a sip and they're like, wait, but this is the palate that I like. Cause like there's whether you're talking elderly people or young people, like there's just this desire for, like the rest of us, we want a whole bunch of variety. We want to experiment with different things. But then like some of the feedback we've gotten is that people will take a sip of Kweza and say like, oh, now I'm like nostalgic for my grandmother, but it tastes like a beer that I like now. And so it's this kind of hybrid of bringing values and flavors and palates and ingredients into what is a global business that everybody kind of wants a variety of products in. And so we produce everything from we're working on, like actually you mentioned, Luke, we just recently made a hibiscus saison using our sorghum. And that's really nice because it takes that kind of sour, tangy twang of sorghum with the saison and hibiscus tartness, and really creates this lovely light, refreshing beer. But we go all the way to stout. And so we're looking at, and we're developing biodiversity beers also with the Rwandan government. So how do we use native to Rwanda, not just sorghum, but like other fruits, other yeasts, etc., and use them in beers so that, why would you drink a German beer in Rwanda? Drink Rwandan beer. And so we, and especially like as tourists, if you come to Rwanda, you want something that's unique. And so there's a lot of very interesting yeasts and flavors here that we're working on. How do we mix tradition and the palates of what people like with kind of the modern taste palette, whether Rwandan expat, tourists, etc., to create unique beers that are unique to Rwanda, and be able to that also tell a story of both the history of women in brewing, the ingredients, and Rwanda itself.
Sorry, you just mentioned there the yeast, so it just struck me. This is not something you've experimented with yet, is it? Like you've experimented with hops to identify specific hops, but you haven't kind of tried different yeasts or anything.
We haven't in any products that we sell yet, because it's not licensed by the FDA, the Rwandan the Food and Drug Administration. That's part of the goal of this biodiversity beer project, is there are, for example, in traditional brewing, in making ichigaje, there's an aloe plant that grows here, a native aloe plant, that there's a symbiotic yeast that grows with it. And that used to be used in brewing. And so our team is a combination of University of Rwanda, the National Police Forensics Lab, the National Cultural Institute, the National Research and Development Agency, Center of Excellence for Biodiversity, Winners Crisps, and Kweza. And so in combination, what we can do is, there's a lot of this knowledge of people are like, oh yeah, there's all these, fruits or yeasts or things that used to be used or that are known to be used. So then it passes into like the police forensics lab, so they can do the extraction of the yeast or the oils or the compounds. So then the University of Rwanda does the food science testing of, make sure it's not toxic, make sure it's not going to damage. And then our job as Kweza and Winners is to test those compounds in products like beer or as flavorings on potato chips, so that we can come up as a team with unique flavors and compounds for Rwanda. Out of that process, we will have some yeasts, so having all of these food science and forensics people involved is so that the Rwanda FDA can have all the documentation needed to make sure that it's food safe. And at that point, then hopefully, because this might be another version of a Kvik yeast, that was, it's a fascinating history of how did that come about. And the yeast that people use here to make ichigaje is actually, it's a 3-day long process that ends up with a very dry powder. And that powder can stay for up to 6 months, in storage. And when you mix the malted sorghum flour with warm water, and then you sprinkle this across the top of it and you let it ferment for 1 day and then you drink it, what is that? Is that actually yeast? Is it a substrate? What's happening? And so it would be great if, Rwanda could be the next, Kvik yeast producer. Like there's something here that people are using that has a great, background and potential in a brewing industry. So that's why our team is together to kind of see if there's anything that Rwanda can put on more the world stage of beer and other beverages and flavorings.
So then let's get on to the project itself. So this is, like you said, it's got 2 aims, I think. And this is where Yakima are kind of spearheading a lot of this. You're putting a lot of effort into this as well. So you've identified these hops that you think will work. You now want to encourage brewers around the world to try and brew, at least with some sorghum, some, depending on their comfort levels, experiment with it. And these hops were kind of taking away one level of experimentation. Presumably, they'll use whatever yeast they normally use and start with that. So and then the idea is that you've developed a whole resource kit here too. One, Yakima are actually giving a discount on the hop. So if anybody's watching this, we'll tell you how to get that discount in a minute. And then you've developed, kind of put together recipes and can art and the whole lot for this. This works kind of, the idea being that the brewers will produce the beer that they want to brew. You have a number of recipes, but they're not limited to those if they want to try something else as well. And then it can all be kind of part of the same project, and you're asking them then to maybe give a percentage back to Kweza to help develop the brewery down there for the reasons that Jessi just outlined. So
exactly that. I mean, we're offering between 30 and 40% discount on these hops when bought together as a bundle. They're available through yakimachief.com or yakimachief.eu, depending on where you are in the world. We've got, like you said, we've got a full resource kit available, which has got a lot of work that Jessi and her team have put together alongside things that we have as well. We've got a lot of the history of sorghum brewing, a lot of how to brew with sorghum recipes. As you said, there's some fantastic artwork, which was done by, Jessi will know the name of the artist, but a wonderful artist from Rwanda as well, who's put together some fantastic label artwork that's available to use. And what we're asking people to do, obviously, YCH are providing them at this discounted rate, so that there's a little bit extra margin left to make a donation back to help kind of expand and further the mission that Kweza have got in Rwanda, and also by doing that, kind of help further African brewing, because that sounds quite patronizing, but further kind of shine a spotlight on African brewing, because I think American brewing is so well documented, European brewing is so well documented, even to an extent a lot of the brewing scene in Asia is quite well documented, but the brewing scene in Africa is no less vibrant and no less kind of storied in its background there as well. But there just aren't really like Euro-American eyes on it that much outside of the very large global brewers, and what they're producing is not necessarily African beer, it's beer made in Africa. So yeah, it's very much the idea of trying to put a little bit back into the African brewing scene as well.
And just there for an example, I'm going to cut you off and I'll just show an example of some of the can artwork here, hopefully. So that's just, that is available to download as part of the package as well, so that there's no requirement to use this, which actually I think is important. There's no requirement to do anything on this. It's kind of, you sign up and you do what feels comfortable for you. You don't have to use the can art. You can come up with your own. There's no specifications on names or recipes, but if you want to know where to start, it's all there and you can kind of give it a hold. So, and the other thing I suppose mentioning on this is pretty much on the honors principle. I mean, you're trusting the brewers here that, they're going to give back a percentage, and, that's what you're trusting, because it's a global community. It's a community of brewers, so most people will. But it's also, if the brewers are kind of coming out and saying there, look, this is a sorghum beer, this is supporting a Rwandan brewery, but also it's something different. There are a lot of beer drinkers who are looking for something different all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, enough people complain about Untapped forcing people to go onto the thing, so you might as well take advantage of that and try something new as well. So what do they do to take part in this? You have the YCH website has all the details, if I remember.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a pretty simple sign up form available through yakimachief.com or yakimachief.eu. depending on where you are in the world. Fill in the details there, and then one of our team in whichever region you happen to be in will be in touch with kind of exactly how to. Thank you very much. With exactly how to take advantage of the discounts as well. That's something that we'll organize all of that and organize the shipping and things like that as we would normally do an order. And exactly that. And once it kind of someone signed in onto this as well, the resource pack is completely freely available, as you said. It's available through the same blog as the pre-order forms as well. And but yeah, we're here to answer any and all questions as well. Likewise, the team at Kweza alongside the team at YCH very much open to answer any questions and help out where we can do with this one. It is we know it's going to be an experimental project for 99% of people that are going to be interested in taking part. So yeah, we're very much in for the journey as well on this one. It's something that's incredibly exciting for what it means for the project as well, but also what it means to just bringing visibility on a new ingredient within global brewing as well.
Yeah. And so, sorry, just to qualify there, you can just contact whatever, Yakima yourself. You can contact if you already have a contact there. They either know about it or know where to get the information for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people out there have got a normal YCH representative they're used to speaking to, everyone has all of the details and will be able to help you there, or they can go directly through the website if you're not already an existing customer, or just say, yep, I know exactly what I want. I want this, let's go. Both options completely available.
Right. And it's, like I said, 30 to 40% discount, which is well worth giving it a try. So the other big thing then is the sorghum. Where are people, you've made it, you said it might be quite difficult to get hold of that. Do you have any information on how people can do that or where they can get it?
We're suggesting speak to whoever you get your local malt from. It's one of them things we thought would be a bigger issue globally than it actually is. We're finding very few places, certainly across Europe, which is where I look after mostly, but equally my colleagues in the States, that there is no availability either as a malted product or as an extract product. There is a vast kind of availability of it for use in not necessarily brewing. Like Jessi said, it's something that gets used quite often as a base sugar in other things, certainly as an extract format. So it's surprisingly easy to get hold of. We found that certainly in Europe, where it isn't available from a specific maltster, if you've got a multiple ingredient supplier, if you've got somewhere that has like yeast, chemicals, malts, hops, and things like that, almost all of them will have availability of sorghum either as an extract product or as a grain itself.
So it should be easy to get started with. Actually, just something that occurred to me there. If most of the sorghum, say, coming out of America is just cattle feed, I presume it is very low value crop. So this sounds like it should be a way that farmers can kind of see a higher value to the crop as well. Would that be something that maybe farmers should be looking at, promoting this a bit more?
We're actually working on that here in Rwanda. Like that's the scenario, is that it grows easily and is one of the cheaper grains, and what we're doing is doing the value add process of turning that into a product that can be used in the brewing industry, and that brings a higher value. And also it's a very stable market. It doesn't matter what happens in the world, people are still having their beers, and so we're able to we're in the midst of setting up contracts with farmers, because we can guarantee that we're going to buy X amount of kilos of sorghum per year from them, and so it brings them a better value than straight raw sorghum. Yeah. So that is a potential for the sorghum market. And I think to the question of where can people get this, I do know that at one point I was on like Bryce's website, the supplier in the US, and they had extracts and I think malt. CNC Malt they had made a round of it, and if breweries contacted them, they probably could do it again. There's also a plug for the Craft Maltsters Association. There's lots of craft malteries around that, you know, I bet if people reached out and said, I would like some malted sorghum, you know, they have the equipment already to do it. So they can, you know, and like Luke was saying, like, you can get sorghum, it's there. It's just whether it's malted or not. Another potential kind of crazy option, but we're actually doing it with a couple of breweries right now. If people want, you know, Rwandan traditionally malted sorghum, then we actually have the ability to export from here. We have ISO, we work with a partner as ISO certification, and we'd be able to export to, you know, European, American markets, et cetera. So it may come at a higher cost just because, you know, you're shipping it from Rwanda. But if that higher cost turns into something that your brewery can really promote and say, this is malted, you know, Rwandan sorghum, and traditionally it's malted here by women. So it's grown by women, malted by women. It's a traditional African crop. It's a biodiversity beer, gluten-free. And if you're like, this came straight from Rwanda, you know, we can make that happen. So, you know, it depends more on season cycles. And so it may be, you know, not available today, but anybody who reaches out, we can arrange for export of traditionally malted sorghum from Rwanda.
Yeah, that's the traditionally malted with the banana ash.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that sounds like one. If someone does that, I want to get the beer because I want to try that one.
Right.
So what else was I going to say? So yeah, so just to come back, like, you have the resource kit, like I said, all the Yakima, just contact them. They'll tell you where to download this and where to thing. So it's pretty much straightforward. Just go to someone you know from Yakima and ask them about this, and they'll give you all the information. So the recipes, are there any particular styles of recipes? Anything that you thought this works best with for a first try? Because you mentioned that you make stouts with it, but also it sounded like that's not what people should be trying for the start.
Well, I think Luke has made mention of this, that if you go to the Kweza Beer Project Collab website on Yakima Chief's website, there's lots of resources there. So we've put together, because one of the other things that we have found in working with sorghum, for example, is that you have to mash at a high temperature to get better extraction at the beginning. So there's like technical things, but there's also 2 recipes that we worked on with Yakima Chief too. So there's IPA recipe and a pale ale recipe. And they are, I believe they're about 80% sorghum. That's the recipe we decided to put, so that it show you can use barley, you can mix in other things. You could reverse those ratios. Also, you could get this hops bundle and use it on barley without any sorghum if you just want to try the hops and support Kweza anyhow. So there's all different versions, but yeah, there's 2 different recipes. And also, you know, Tapiwa and I, and sorry you can't hear Tapiwa today, you should listen to the last podcast we did with her so you can hear her background in brewing. But there's we're always available to work individually with brewers that are interested in figuring out a recipe. We'll work with you and help you through, you know, any details. And we have a great worldwide network of other brewers in Africa and North America who have worked with sorghum, who are also very resourceful, very open to helping people brew for the first time with sorghum. So if there's any hesitations or questions, but there's curiosity around it, please do reach out, you know, at least for Kweza, reach out through our social media, through any way you can find us. We'll answer you. And yeah, it's just to encourage people to try these new hops, or not new, but kind of new in this use of sorghum. Right. Try sorghum and support Kweza, so we can, you know, really make sure that Rwanda's first craft brewery really does get going.
Right. So yeah, again, I mean, let's re-emphasize what both of you said there. I mean, this is not something, if you want to just take the thing and try it on a small kit, then fine, but you're not alone on this. If you want to try something, this is a genuine collab between whatever brewery wants to do it, plus Yakima, plus Kweza. I mean, you can all give your advice and help out and make it a real collaboration. Is there
we have a little resource open to people from our team and from Jessi's team. There's going to be no question that a brewer can come at us that we haven't got the answer for, I would hope.
No, that's a challenge. Someone's going to
challenge us.
Is there a time on this that you're seeing this as a specific time limited project that you can then kind of show all the beers, or is this open ended, or how's that working?
We're running the project through March at the moment, but depending on kind of uptake through brewers, that could be extended if need be. But yeah, the idea is to run the discounted promotion right the way through March, but brewers are then at their own discretion of when to brew the beer thereafter. Very much want to allow people to work around their existing schedules.
Right. Okay. So listen. I think
a date that people could use, just to throw in some Rwandan holidays here and tradition. It's a bit off in the future, but August 4th it's called Umuganura Day here in Rwanda. It's Harvest Day. It's like the American Thanksgiving, and it's to celebrate the harvest of sorghum, which happens in June, July, and then there's time to malt, time to brew, and then August 4th is when the harvest gets celebrated, and that is through traditionally drinking a lot of sorghum beers. So you could always put that on the calendar, and celebrate with Rwanda for Umuganura Day.
I'll just say we have a couple of viewers here, so if anybody has a question, we're going to be finishing up soon, so type in your question there before we go. Because I wanted to ask, you said, you were saying that sorghum traditionally is more of a lower alcohol beer. So do you see like those recipes, are they like more sessionable beers down that side, or that they're not like imperial stouts, that they're sessionable beers?
Much more sessionable. We've actually gotten, we were making slightly higher alcohol beers, like a different sort. We also make a ginger beer, and that was coming out higher alcohol. We've actually found a lot that the majority of people have asked us to keep the alcohol at a sessionable level. And so it's worked out really well, because that way we don't need to really mess with sorghum. We don't need to go find the enzymes, do everything. Everything comes out, generally at like a 4 to 4.4% beer. We also use, it's traditional here also to use honey in beer. And so we add in honey to a couple of our beers, and that can edge the alcohol level up a little bit. But yeah, they're nice sessionable beers. And also, like we were talking about, sorghum itself is a little bit lighter. So these are really just like really drinkable,
right,
easy drinking beers.
Right, which sounds like, that there's a market for those if the brewers want to give it a try. So listen, guys, I think that's everything. Is there anything we should have? I'm always worried that I forgot to ask, or we didn't cover, or anything there. I mean, is there anything about sorghum itself there that technically that we didn't mention, or no? Okay.
We covered.
Okay, and we don't have any questions.
I think it's just giving it a try.
Yeah, I think hopefully people will, because I know, because not only like if you do this, not only is the brewer kind of getting involved to try something new, they're helping out, they're setting up a genuine collaboration with another brewery on another continent for most of them, and there's a story behind their beer then again, which also just helps make it easier to sell. I mean, if there's a story behind your beer, that's what beer's about, really. So hopefully people will give this a try. Like I said, we don't seem to have any questions. We did have despite the late notice on this, we had a few viewers, but there's nobody asking any questions, so we must have covered everything. So yeah, if anybody also wants to check out, we do have, as Jessi mentioned there, sometime last year we spoke with ourselves, with Tolakazi from South Africa and with Bature from Nigeria. We talked about traditional brewing, craft brewing. So those sessions are up there, well worth checking out, and you'll get more of a story behind what Kweza is about and how it got started and what it's trying to do. And and just the traditional craft brewing that kind of uses sorghum as well. So guys, I'll just say thanks a million for that. Please, anybody watching, do contact either Jessi or Luke or someone in Yakima and give us a try. It sounds like it'll be, I hope we'll see a load of, I don't know how you're branding it. I don't know what names they'll use, but hopefully something that'll say Kweza or sorghum on loads of cans in the next year. All right.
Beautiful.
Okay, we'll finish up. So thanks a million for all your time.